Welcome to Sports Love Media on YouTube. It's your guy, Sports Love, broadcasting live today, November 5th, 2025. We are starting a new weekly live stream that will take place during the respective seasons, and this is episode 1 of season 1, Hoops and Pucks and Wednesdays, oh my. In this live stream, we will discuss college basketball, men and women's college basketball. We will discuss NBA basketball, and we will discuss NHL hockey. I will go over the games that are scheduled to take place specifically on Wednesdays, because that's the day we're going to focus on when we do these. And it'll be the matchups that they have, any other pertinent information regarding like time of when it will start. And then we'll go through every game within, like, say, men, or every game within women. And then after I do that, I'll go back through and tell you who I picked to win the games. So this is going to be an interesting thing that we're going to do. And we will be doing this on a weekly basis on Wednesdays for the foreseeable future, at least through the end of the respective seasons. And this could include playoffs as well. So for the college aspect of things, we will continue to do it at least through March Madness, and then we'll do a separate thing for March Madness. For the NBA, we'll continue to do it through the, till the playoffs, and then NHL hockey will do the same thing, and we still may continue to be able to doing that during the said playoffs. Next week, the NBA G League will be added onto the list of games that we will talk about. So let's get into this. And let's go for the Hoops and Pucks and Wednesdays. Oh my, episode 1, season 1. So you have Milligan versus Middle Tennessee. That game is scheduled to start at 10:30 a.m. today, Wednesday, November 5th. All times that I list will be in Central Time. You have Bluefield University versus Presbyterian, 5 o'clock today. RIT versus Binghamton, 5 p.m. today. Rider versus Rutgers, 5 p.m. today. Carolina University versus Appalachian State, 5:30 p.m. Coppin State versus LaSalle, 5:30 p.m. College of Biblical Studies versus UTSA, 6 p.m. Mississippi University for women playing Mississippi Valley State at 6 p.m. And by the way, we're discussing men's college basketball right now. Washington and Lee versus James Madison, 6 p.m. Dickinson in Pennsylvania versus Lafayette, 6 p.m. Regent versus Norfolk State, 6 p.m. Belmont Abbey versus Elon, 6 p.m. Dallas versus Prairie View A&M, 6 p.m. Delaware State versus Temple, 6 p.m. Plattsburgh State versus Vermont, 6 p.m. LaGrange versus Mercer, 6 p.m. Lynchburg versus Queens University, 6 p.m. Maryland Eastern Shore versus Georgia, 6 p.m. Southern Indiana versus Butler, 6 p.m. Southern Virginia versus Richmond, 6 p.m. South Dakota versus Creighton, 7 p.m. Texas San Antonio versus Texas State, 7 p.m. Alabama A&M versus Indiana, 7 p.m. Tarleton State versus LSU, 7 p.m. Southern versus Marquette, 7 p.m. East Texas A&M versus New Mexico, 8 p.m. Ottawa and Arizona versus Montana, 8 p.m. South Carolina Upstate versus Fresno State, 8 p.m. North Dakota State versus UC Davis, 8 p.m. Northwest Indian versus Montana State, 8 p.m. Bethesda University versus Utah Tech, 8 p.m. North Alabama versus Mississippi State, 8 p.m. Pacific Lutheran versus Cal Poly, 9 p.m. And let's see, Life Pacific versus Pacific, 9 p.m. And Eastern Michigan versus Loyola Marymount. I don't have a time for that one. So, hello there, Nicholas. How are you doing? And how are you doing, John? Okay, now that we've gone over the men's college basketball games that are scheduled for today on November 5th, let's go over who I think is going to win the games. And these are just picks. I could be totally right or I could be totally wrong. I stand by my picks regardless of how it goes. So we're just going to do this and see what happens with it. So in the Milligan-Middle Tennessee game, I'm going to have Middle Tennessee win that one. Bluefield versus Presbyterian, I pick Bluefield University. RIT versus Binghamton, I pick Binghamton. Rutgers versus Rider, I pick Rutgers. Carolina University versus Appalachian State, I have Appalachian State. Coppin State versus LaSalle, I have Coppin State. College of Biblical Studies or the UTSA, I have UTSA to win that one. Mississippi University for women versus Mississippi Valley State, I choose Mississippi Valley State. Washington and Lee versus James Madison, I pick James Madison. Dickinson in Pennsylvania versus Lafayette, I pick Dickinson in Pennsylvania. Regent versus Norfolk State, I pick Regent. Belmont Abbey versus Elon, I pick Belmont Abbey. Dallas versus Prairie View A&M, I go Prairie View A&M. Delaware State versus Temple, I'm going Temple. Plattsburgh State versus Vermont, I'm going Vermont. LaGrange versus Mercer, I'm going Mercer. Lynchburg versus Queens University, I'm going Lynchburg. Maryland Eastern Shore versus Georgia, I'm going Georgia. Southern Indiana versus Butler, I'm going Southern Indiana. Southern Virginia versus Richmond, I'm going Southern Virginia. South Dakota versus Creighton, I'm going Creighton. Texas A&M in San Antonio versus Texas State, I'm going Texas State. Alabama A&M versus Indiana, I'm going to go Indiana. Tarleton State versus LSU, I'm going LSU. Southern versus Marquette, I'm going Marquette. East Texas A&M versus New Mexico, I'm going East Texas A&M. Ottawa and Arizona versus Montana, I'm going Montana. South Carolina Upstate versus Fresno State, I'm going Fresno State. North Dakota State versus UC Davis, I'm going to go North Dakota State. Northwest Indian versus Montana State, I'm going Northwest Indian. Bethesda University versus Utah Tech, I'm going Utah Tech. North Alabama versus Mississippi State, I'm going to go Mississippi State. Pacific Lutheran versus Cal Poly, I'm going to go Pacific Lutheran. For Life Pacific versus Pacific, I'm going Life Pacific. And then Eastern Michigan versus Loyola Marymount, I'm going to go Eastern Michigan. That's my picks for the men's college basketball games, which will be taking place today, November 5th, 2025, on Wednesday, today. All right, now let's talk women's college basketball. Again, same kind of setup. I'll go over who's playing and at what time, and then after I go through all the games on that, then I will go back through and make my picks for who I think will win the game. Okay, so you have Palm Beach Atlantic versus North Florida. That is scheduled to start at 10 a.m. Harris Stowe State versus Lindenwood, 11 a.m. Winthrop versus Chicago State, 11 a.m. San Diego versus UC Irvine, 1 p.m. Pelican versus Delaware State, 4:30 p.m. Maryland Eastern Shore versus VCU, 5 p.m. Farley Dickinson versus Notre Dame, 6 p.m. Mississippi University for women versus Alcorn State, 6 p.m. Sunny New Paltz versus Wagner, 6 p.m. Morris College versus South Carolina State, 6 p.m. Apprentice School versus Hampton, 6 p.m. Randolph College versus Longwood, 6 p.m. Talladega versus Alabama A&M, 6 p.m. Fairfield versus Villanova, 6 p.m. Southern versus Iowa State, 6:30 p.m. East Texas A&M versus Oklahoma State, 6:30 p.m. Kentucky State versus Western Kentucky, 6:30 p.m. Kansas City versus Kansas, 6:30 p.m. UNC Greensboro versus San Francisco, 6:30 p.m. Oakland versus Wisconsin, 6:30 p.m. New Orleans versus Tulsa, 6:30 p.m. Utah Valley versus Loyola Marymount, 7 p.m. Texas A&M Corpus Christi versus Texas A&M, 7 p.m. Indianapolis versus Northwestern, 7 p.m. Northwest University versus Seattle University, 8 p.m. Coastal Carolina versus BYU, 8 p.m. Washington State versus UNLV. That's at 8:30 p.m. So now we're going to make the picks on who we think is going to win the women's games now. So here we go. In the Palm Beach Atlantic, North Florida, I go Palm Beach Atlantic. Harris Stowe State versus Lindenwood, I go Harris Stowe State. Winthrop versus Chicago State, I'm picking Winthrop. San Diego versus UC Irvine, I'm going San Diego. Pelican versus Delaware State, I'm going Pelican. Maryland Eastern Shore versus VCU, I'm going VCU. In the Farley Dickinson versus Notre Dame, I'm going Notre Dame. Mississippi University for women versus Alcorn State, I'm picking Alcorn State. Sunny New Paltz versus Wagner, I'm going Wagner. Morris College or South Carolina State, I'm going South Carolina State. Apprentice School versus Hampton, I'm going Apprentice School. Randolph College versus Longwood, I'm going Randolph College. Talladega versus Alabama A&M, I'm going Talladega. Fairfield versus Villanova, I'm going Villanova. Southern versus Iowa State, I will go Iowa State. East Texas A&M versus Oklahoma State, I will go Oklahoma State. Let's see. In the Kentucky State, Western Kentucky game, I will be picking Western Kentucky. In the Kansas City, Kansas game, I'm going Kansas. UNC Greensboro or San Francisco, I'm going to go UNC Greensboro. Oakland versus Wisconsin, I think I'm going to go Wisconsin. New Orleans versus Tulsa, I think I'm going to go Tulsa over New Orleans. Utah Valley over Loyola Marymount, I'm going to go Loyola Marymount. Texas A&M in Corpus Christi, versus Texas A&M, I'm going to go the regular Texas A&M. Indianapolis versus Northwestern, I will take Northwestern. Northwest University versus Seattle University, I will go Northwest University. Coastal Carolina versus BYU, I think I'm going to go BYU. And Washington State versus UNLV, I'm going to go UNLV. All right, so there's my picks for the women's college basketball. Now, let's look at who is playing in the regular NBA. And again, next week, I will be adding the NBA G League to this list. They start play in a couple of days. And also, I may not be able to discuss college hockey unless they have games on Wednesday, which I noticed this week they did not, so we will not be discussing college hockey. However, if there are any matches in the future that are on Wednesday, then we will discuss it. In the NBA, you have Milwaukee versus Toronto, 6:30 p.m., Orlando versus Atlanta, 7 p.m. Philadelphia versus Chicago, 7 p.m. Charlotte versus New Orleans, 7 p.m. Phoenix versus Golden State, 9 p.m. Oklahoma City versus the Los Angeles Clippers, 10 p.m. Those are the games in the NBA that's going to be playing today. So, my picks for the NBA games that's going to be played today, I have Milwaukee defeating Toronto, Atlanta defeating Orlando, Philadelphia defeats Chicago, New Orleans defeats Charlotte, Phoenix defeats Golden State, and Oklahoma City defeats the Los Angeles Clippers. All right, there's not many games in the NHL this week, so in the NHL, we have Utah versus Toronto, 6 p.m., we have St. Louis versus Washington, 6:30 p.m. Columbus versus Calgary, 8:30 p.m. Chicago versus Vancouver, 9 p.m. And San Jose versus Seattle, 9 p.m. So, in that, I have Toronto defeats Utah, Washington defeats St. Louis, Columbus beats Calgary, Chicago defeats Vancouver, and Seattle defeats San Jose. Those are my picks for the NHL hockey. Again, some weeks there will be more games than others, and some there will not be. This concludes my picks for the first episode of Hoops and Pucks and Wednesdays. Oh my. If you notice the theme there, Wednesdays on the last part specifically means that the games that we will be talking about will be taking place on Wednesday. Each week we will be doing this at least till the end of the respective seasons and whatnot. It could go a little longer depending on how things go, but we'll see where it goes. Also, these picks are my picks. Does anybody want to talk about any of the picks that I made? Well, if not, I do thank you for joining me for episode 1, season 1 of Hoops and Pucks and Wednesdays. Oh my! We will do this again next week. Now the time in which we do these will depend on a couple of factors, including what time the competitions get started. So if the competitions as a whole start later in the day, then we will do this later in the day on Wednesday. Otherwise, it'll be kind of early, like how this one is right now. So we'll wait and see how that plays out each week. If you will, please hit the like button, please hit the subscribe button, please hit the notification bell so you can be made aware of when I'm doing these live streams, when I have sports action videos, when I have sports education videos, when I broadcast live, or when I have breaking news in the sports world. Also, if you wish to subscribe to the channel, it is greatly appreciated. You can do that in 2 ways. You can go to www.youtube.com, the slash symbol, the @ symbol, SPORTSLOV, or you can go to the YouTube search tab and type in Sports Love Media as 2 words, SPORTSLOV, the first word, Media, MEDIA, as the second word. You'll know it's me because I have Sports Love Media burned onto a basketball as my avatar. I'm also on Twitter X, and my handle there is @BobAmin16. That is the @ symbol, BOBAMIN16. Thank you again for joining me for this first episode of this new weekly live stream. I do greatly appreciate you. Sports Love Media signing out. I hope you have a wonderful day.